So welcome everyone to our weekly grand rounds. Just as a reminder, just please keep yourself on mute unless you are speaking, and then at the end, feel free to unmute yourself for any questions or send them through the chat as you think of them or at the end. And as to introduce our guest speaker, I'll turn the floor over to Dr. Bervin.
Well, thank you, Drew, and Eric, thanks for joining us so much today. Thank you for your contribution to our discussion this morning, and we all look forward to your presentation here with Grand Rounds. Dr. Carson has been a friend, a mentor, and a colleague to me for my entire career in orthopedics. Dr. Carson actually grew up in Roxbury, Massachusetts, which is just near Boston, and he went on to Tufts University, where he was a outstanding student and athlete. He was with the football team as well as the track and field team at Tufts, and that likely led to his interest and expertise in sports medicine. Our journeys actually met in Boston, where Dr. Carson was my senior resident and then my chief resident. And over the course of our time together, I had a terrific opportunity to really learn much from him. Not just how to nail a femur and how to take care of trauma, but really personally, I think Dr. Carson's an incredible mentor. It was interesting that he said he has a soft voice because Eric is remarkably soft-spoken, but he's got a very well-heard voice. And I think the esteem and the regard that we all continue to hold Eric in, and the importance and meaning of his voice to all of us has been lifelong. Eric's career went from Harvard on to HSS, where he did his fellowship in sports medicine, and he did some travels. And I'm interested in hearing about between Emory and Louisiana, and then most of his time at the University of Virginia, the differences between Boston and those areas. And now Eric's already alluded to how much different St. Louis is, and Eric is now on the sports medicine group in Washington University in St. Louis, and is a real leader in the community there. Eric's also been a leader, again, in the academy. He's the president of the Jared Gladden Society, and he's also done a lot of work with sports medicine on a national level as a team physician for some of the NFL teams, and as an Olympic sports medicine leader, committee member and leader. So with that, Eric, I'm very enthusiastic about hearing about your journey, and thank you for sharing that with us today.
Thanks, Sig. I really appreciate it. And, you know, as you'll hear a little bit about the presentation, how this came about me giving grand rounds, you'll hear a little bit about it. But thank you very much for this distinguished honor of speaking to the community of UCSF Orthopedic for the grand rounds today. I'd like to thank Dr. Parker, Dr. Vale, and Dr. Sig Bervin for this tremendous opportunity to speak. My invitation was nothing random. Oh, I should say I have no disclosures here, sorry. My invitation was nothing random. Dr. Sig Bervin, who is an extremely close friend, and was one of my junior residents, as alluded to when I was a chief resident at Harvard Combined Program, reached out to me in a moment of chaos in this country. We started an open dialogue, and I wrote when I had written a heartfelt personal statement on behalf of the J.R. Gladden Society as the president in response to the George Floyd murder in Minneapolis. From this deep encounter, I was motivated to share more of my story. My talk today is the journey of a Black academic orthopedic surgeon. This is my story, however unique, parallels many Black and brown orthopedic surgeons. The many life experiences I will share with you have made me see the world through open eyes and with an open heart. Without sharing this part of my life, you cannot understand me as a man and as a person in the tortuous path that it took for me to become an orthopedic surgeon. Oops, sorry. Go back here one second. Yeah, there you go. For me, I have roots back to Harvard from birth. In 1960, I was born at the Boston Lion Hospital, an inner city hospital for indigent and poor Black population of Boston, directly across the street from the Harvard School Quadrangle. A hospital of which many of you are not familiar with, however, bears its historical roots in academic medicine. The hospital was founded in 1832 a true trailblazer in obstetrics and gynecology, being the first of its kind, a women's hospital. This newly founded hospital was the first to administer ether anesthesia to a woman in delivery, the first hospital to recognize the needs for sterile techniques and gloves in the birthing process, standardized cesarean section procedures, developed preventive medicine for newborns and identification of Rh factor in blood. The hospital will become part of a 3-hospital merger, the Robert Bent Brigham and the Peter Bent Brigham in 1970, becoming the Brigham and Women's Hospitals as we know it today. There are many humbling stories related to this. An interesting fact is I'm part of one of the longest longitudinal studies in the United States science, the collaborative perinatal study, the women and pregnancy, that was presented in 1972. This study involved 55,000 pregnant women, along with 12 sites across the country, centered in Boston, looking at the development of children. For me and my siblings, we have been followed for over 50 years, attempting to correlate smoking, which my mother did at that point in time, low birth weight, and the thought that this correlated with intelligence. Well, let's just say my siblings and myself have been outliers in this study and have all obtained graduate degrees. As stated earlier, I grew up in the inner city of Boston in a neighborhood called Roxbury. The residents were primarily Black and Latino of poverty, who lived on government assistance with no job opportunities or prospects for future, directly related to the lack of education. Roxbury directly abuts against the prestigious Harvard University School of Medicine and its many prestigious hospitals. With that being said, this hospital possessed one of the highest infant mortality rates in the country in the past. This is my neighborhood, the Academy Homes, the projects, where thousands of people lived in self-contained and separate neighborhoods from the rest of Boston. As James Dean said, I can't change the direction of the wind, but I can adjust my sails to always reach my destination. My mother was a single divorced parent of 4 children. She was a survivor of domestic violence and physical abuse. My mother, even in this hopeless situation, sacrificed her all for her children, making him her #1 priority and giving him a better life. My mother worked tirelessly 2, if not 3 jobs, 7 days a week, attempting to make financial ends meet, all for her children. As the oldest of 4, I had additional responsibilities for my siblings. To facilitate our childhood growth and avoid the perils of the inner city and the potential problems, she kept us extremely busy with many extracurricular activities, including the children's program at the Berklee School of Music, children's program with the Boston Ballet, of which I danced in the Nutcracker. I participated in an outdoor program, Youth Enrichment Services, which exposed me to the outdoors, and it afforded me the opportunity to learn to ski, of which I've skied not just throughout the United States, but throughout the world. All amazing nonprofit organizations with programming benefiting inner city youth of Boston, like myself, and giving me a chance to be successful and live beyond Roxbury. Subsequently in the future, I would serve on these nonprofit boards, providing valuable time as a mentor and giving back financially, affording some other youth, why is that doing that? Okay, sorry. Is it still there or did it disappear?
We can see your slides.
You can see my slides, I can't see them. Oops, they disappeared, where'd they go?
We see your slides.
I can't see them though. What happened? There you go, sorry. I couldn't see them. In short, you should never view your challenges as a disadvantage. Instead, it's important for you to understand that your experiences facing and overcoming adversity are actually one of your biggest. Michelle Obama. During the 1960s and 70s, there was much unrest in this country with an attempt at social justice, born the Civil Rights Movement. This movement forced the hands of Boston with attempting to desegregate one of the most segregated school systems in the United States and ultimate equity in the education system. For me as a child, I was placed in the middle of this. Judge Garrity placed a federal mandate to desegregate the Boston public school systems. This meant me leaving my neighborhood of Roxbury, predominantly Black, traveling across uncharted territories into South Boston, which was pretty much white and Irish. As a child, I was placed on a big yellow bus and transported into a hostile neighborhood with a police escort. Curse words, profanities were yelled from the streets, along with rocks being thrown at it. I still remember clearly that feeling of true fear. My mother had a clear understanding of the importance of education as a means of her children getting ahead in life. She sought an alternative to the chaos associated with forced busing in Boston. METCO, which was a state and federally funded volunteer busing program that transported inner city children like myself and siblings to suburban towns around Boston. This was a true challenge in many ways, awakening before the sun rose at 5 a.m. to catch my bus, crisscrossing across Boston to pick up my fellow students, and then commuting 25 miles south of the city and not getting home till 7 p.m. that night. A grueling schedule for the next 11 years until graduating from high school. The long days were one thing, however, the social adjustments presented itself another great challenge. Roxbury, which is in the inner city, I describe as a concrete jungle, in stark contrast to the picturesque, all-white, middle-class neighborhood of Walpole. For me, I was living two lives. In Roxbury, my childhood good friends would jokingly comment, "You talk like a white boy." On the other end, I felt left out, struggling to fit in socially. I was an outsider in both my worlds. My saving grace was I excelled at both football and track. I was a standout in track, winning a state championship, along with winning a state championship in football. The volunteer busing program afforded me an academic foundation and the strength to see the future and success in attending college, unlike many of my childhood friends who gave up and dropped out of high school, a lost generation related to the social justice in Boston. Upon graduation from Walpole, I was a highly recruited dual athlete with many Division I programs expressing interest. However, there was a gut feeling competing at such a high level academically would not afford me adequate time for my studies. It was important to me, but more important to my mother, I graduated from college. I opted to attend Tufts University, a better balance of academics and athletics. However, I quickly learned I was ill prepared for this small Ivy League experience. My classmates had attended the New England elite boarding schools such as Exeter, Choate, Northfield, Mount Hermon, Deerfield, and Andover Academy. The struggle was real academically my freshman year. This struggle led to a feeling of less than and why am I here? Words of defeat that have never been part of my vocabulary. I would not be defeated and most often disappoint my mother who had invested her all in me. I went home that summer after freshman year and had a moment of self-reflection and said I was not going to fail. I came back to school that fall more positive than ever, and with the assistance of one of my college roommates, Louis Romeo, who was a mechanical engineer major and also pre-med. He had a focus on not only attending medical school, but becoming an orthopedic surgeon. I knew nothing about becoming a doctor and had no mentors. I followed Lou's lead. With renewed energy, academic success came. I graduated with honors distinction. Even more impressive than my achievements was my mother completed her bachelor's in nursing that same year very quietly. Post-graduation came with hard decisions of what to do with my life. I excelled in football enough to receive invitations to professional football training camps for the fledgling USFL League. However appealing, this was not part of my plan. Attending medical school and becoming an orthopedic surgeon was my ultimate dream. The demands of 3 sports, football, track and field, along with the rigors of my studies of biology and being a pre-med at Tufts University, I needed additional pre-medical coursework to apply to medical school. I decided to matriculate at a pre-medical program at Bryn Mawr College, post-baccalaureate for pre-meds in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. At that time, one of a few programs in the country of its kind. I was granted a full scholarship through the Josiah Macy Foundation, which is a philanthropic foundation in New York, providing financial resources for disadvantaged Black and Brown students pursuing a career in medicine. This unique opportunity was the push I needed, providing a focused environment to guide me on this difficult path towards medical school. Upon completion of the rigorous year of Grimoire, another opportunity fell in my lap. A Chicago-based pipeline program called CHAMPS program, led by an amazing individual, John Bradley. He worked tirelessly in this program to assist and mentor disadvantaged Black students from elementary school to college students in careers with interest in medicine and STEM careers. A mantra of Mr. Bradley's is, only in darkness can we see the stars. These two amazing life experiences provided the well-needed guidance and direction to not only fulfill my dreams, but towards the ultimate success. The dream was happening. Oops, let me go back one slide, sorry. The dream was happening. I matriculated in medical school at the University of Illinois College of Medicine, and I was one step closer to my dream, but was I really? Hearing disparaging comments from my classmates, such as you were accepted to medical school as a part of affirmative action, what makes you think you deserve this opportunity? This is all in the face of excelling academically and at the top of my medical school class. The obstacles in front of me were real. To facilitate our career paths in medical school, we were assigned a faculty advisor. My assigned advisor was a white African from South Africa and served as the vice chairman in the Department of Orthopaedic Surgery at the University of Illinois. I met with him my first year of medical school with excitement. Instead, I left feeling disappointed and feeling quite dismissed. This was not going to deter me. I then met again with him at the end of my second year, just after receiving my USMLE scores, which I crushed, scoring the top 2 percentile. His comment first was, "Are these your scores?" I commented, "Yes." And there was no congratulation or anything else given at that moment. He hesitated and then spoke, "You are obviously very bright and excelling academically. You should consider a career like primary care to take care of your people." I stated I was only interested in orthopedic surgery and nothing else. They were silent, left. I left the meeting feeling destroyed with no hope. He was not going to support my dreams of a career path in orthopedic surgeon, and without his letter of recommendation and support, I was done. I broke down and cried and had a feeling of being lost and alone. A couple weeks later, I was introduced to a Black PGY4 orthopedic resident at Cook County Hospital, Robert Nelson, who heard my story. He pulled me aside and told me, "Eric, I got your back." A week later, he called me and told me to meet him in the hospital. He had someone for me to meet. He introduced me to Dr. James Hill, an orthopedic surgeon on faculty at Northwestern. He was the first Black orthopedic resident. He then subsequently came back on staff as the first Black faculty member. He shared with me similar disheartening stories and told me, "Eric, you are gifted and special. You have all the skills to become an excellent orthopedic surgeon, and with my help, I will get you there." And he did. True to his word in every way, he provided me with an introduction to Augustus White at the end of my third year when returning back to Boston to see family. This was the ultimate experience of experiences. For me as a child growing up in Roxbury, I had a poster of Dr. White, exceptional Black scientist. This was no different than a young Black male savoring a poster of Michael Jordan with dreams of being in the NBA. That initial meeting, I had these feelings of nervousness and a sense of awe upon meeting Dr. Augustus White. He is a man of many firsts. He was the first medical student at Stanford, first Black male resident at Yale, and he was the first Black faculty at Yale and at Harvard, along with one of the founders of the J.R. Gladden Society, of which I'm the president. I still remember sitting in his large Harvard office across from him like it was yesterday, a day that changed my life. This was the beginning of a special mentorship, sponsorship, and lifelong friendship. That spring, my fourth year of medical school culminated with me matching at Harvard University. There was complete disbelief in my medical school class and this look of, "Are you truly deserving?" I at that point in time, felt as though I had still a lot to prove. Pursuing success in academic orthopedic surgeon was a means to prove I was worthy of all these well-deserved achievements and tremendous opportunities. Such a path in academia and being on the cutting edge of innovation, teaching, research, and orthopedic surgery all the naysayers and doubters would have to acknowledge all of my success. From Oprah Winfrey, turn your words into wisdom. Matching at Harvard University for my orthopedic training was truly amazing. For me, moving back to my same inner city neighborhood of Roxbury was a priority. Such a commitment and visual for the neighborhood youth, local kid does good, could be a beacon of hope for all the youth in the neighborhood with dreams of something bigger. This dilapidated, rundown inner city neighborhood, now desirable because of its location, was undergoing gentrification and a mixture of the old and the new, of which I thought was perfect for my new family. The Harvard Orthopaedic Residency was quite intimidating. It brought forth moments of insecurity. I looked around the room at my fellow orthopedic residents, seeing names such as Bernstein, Mankin, Epps, Sledge, Hull, and many other legacy children of famous orthopedic surgeons in the program, all deserving true white privilege and nothing less. I asked myself, did I belong? And the answer was yes. The experience at Harvard was absolutely amazing, with both lifelong friendships and phenomenal training. Dr. Mankin, as a leader and chairman of the Harvard Orthopedic Combined Orthopedic Surgery Residency, was a driving force towards excellence. He truly led by example and was about diversifying the program in his very quiet way, but quite intentional, with recruitment of Black residents and women when many other leaders across the country of residencies did not, for that was the norm. His intent was based off his humble beginnings in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania as a young Jewish man, going against the norms, and his rise in the 1970s at Harvard University, of which many years did not acknowledge those people of Jewish descent. I am truly grateful to him and the opportunity he has instilled upon me. Another amazing highlight of my Harvard University experience was working hand in hand with my mother at Mass General Hospital, who was an orthopedic nurse. The proud look and smile my mother displayed regularly was infectious and directly related to my great accomplishments. A true moment of reflection came as a PGY5 while in the trauma room at Mass General Hospital. I awakened in the call room, preparing for tumor breakfast rounds with Dr. Mankin, when I was looking in the mirror and I looked at myself and recognized I had truly made it. With all these life-changing moments upon my return to Boston as an orthopedic resident at Harvard, there are, however, a particular low moment of which I wrote about in my J.R. Gladden statement related to the horrific incident. To bring this incident from the depths of my memories, which touched me as a Black man, was admittedly quite emotional for me on so many levels. The tragic event in 1989 changed race relations in Boston and happened directly in my neighborhood. A prominent, affluent white couple was attending birth classes at Brigham and Women's Hospital, and their car was attacked by a Black intruder, shooting Miss Carol Stewart, who was 8 months pregnant, to death, and shooting her husband, Charles Stewart, in the leg. A totally senseless crime. There was literally a manhunt from door to door to find the killer in this Mission Hill, Roxbury neighborhood. Civil rights of persons living in this neighborhood were thrown out the window. For me, as I headed to work, walking my typical route, morning rounds at Brigham and Women's Hospital at 6 a.m., the day following the Carol Stewart murder, I was accosted and wrestled to the ground by police aggressively and found myself face down with my hands behind my back, police officers over me with guns pointed at my head. While on the ground, I looked to my left and I looked to my right. There were 10 other young Black men face down with their hands behind their back, supposedly fitting the description of the Black intruder that killed Carol Stewart. I stood out amongst the mass of these men, for I was wearing pink scrubs, a white long jacket, Harvard ID, and stethoscope in pocket. At that specific moment, anger filled me. I was eventually released, rushed off quickly to the hospital, for I was more concerned about being late for morning rounds. I made no mention of this incident that morning to no one. All Black men, whether a doctor or a college student, have life experiences, unfortunately, like this, and we consider routine. being followed in a store by a security guard as a potential thief, being profiled while driving black, or for me, this was the third time that I had a gun pointed on me. How ridiculous is this to call this routine? Eventually, there was an arrest of a man who fit the description, a profile, Willie Bennett. There was a demand to bring back the death penalty in Massachusetts for this brutal crime. The worst part of this crime was this story was completely fabricated by the husband, Charles Stuart. There was no black intruder. It was him, Charles Stuart, who shot his pregnant wife for selfish reasons. A day later, upon being discharged from the hospital and an arrest warrant being placed on him, he jumped from the Tobin Bridge 135 feet into the Mystic River to his death. Willie Bennett, the black man falsely arrested, life was completely destroyed. As I reflect on this incident, this could have easily been me who was the person who was arrested. Trust in the Roxbury community was lost, and race relations have never recovered since that point in time. Truly sad. Post-residency from Harvard in sports medicine at HSS, I attempted to find a home, being a junior faculty member both at Emory and LSU. I finally found a home at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. In many respects, the job and the man chose me. The man being Dr. Cato Lorenzen, the new chairman of orthopedic surgery at the University of Virginia. I initially met Dr. Lorenzen while I was an undergrad at Tufts University, and then subsequently as a junior resident when he was a chief resident at Harvard. Eventually, I worked in his MIT tissue regenerative lab. Dr. Lorenzen is the most accomplished clinical scientist in orthopedic surgery, with awards from many societies, from engineering to orthopedics to mentoring. Dr. Lorenzen, as a new chair of orthopedic surgeon at the University of Virginia, placed his focus and attention on me as his first recruit. Dr. Lorenzen rolled out the red carpet and and offered a generous recruitment package on 2 occasions. Each time I graciously turned down these offers. I strongly believe the University of Virginia was not ready for diversity. Dr. Lorenzen being the first ever black chairman at the University of Virginia School of Medicine. During my recruitment visits to the University of Virginia, the environment was less than friendly. However, he was relentless in me joining his faculty and I accepted it on the 3rd attempt. Most importantly, I saw his vision of what he had going forward. His mission was lofty: to diversify the University of Virginia Orthopedic Surgery Department, which sadly had only trained 2 black orthopedic surgeons of color in its entire history. In the big picture, and from my perspective, this was going to be a real challenge and in some respects overwhelming. However, Dr. Lorenzen's eyes saw nothing but this being possible. There started the Pied Piper phenomenon. Black medical students who excelled academically from top academic institutions around the country, such as Harvard, Hopkins, Stanford, saw someone who looked like them in a leadership position. In a short time, the orthopedic residency transformed to a more diverse group of orthopedic residents of approximately 40% being black, and a recruitment of 1 additional black faculty member. I have to admit, this initiative made many of my white colleagues quite uncomfortable. These momentous changes were noted both within the institution of University of Virginia, but nationally. I would consider this one of my greatest accomplishments, being part of this initiative. All was great until Dr. Lorenzen was recruited away to the University of Connecticut to become the dean of the medical school and vice president of health affairs. Being Dr. Lorenzen's #1 soldier and giving him unconditional loyalty during his tenure as chairman, he wrote me into his contract to move to University of Connecticut with him. However, this was not to be, for this was his dream and not mine. I opted to remain at the University of Virginia. This decision to stay proved to be challenging years to follow. Without my cloak of protection from Dr. Lorenzen, I was isolated, alone, feeling quite lost in a hostile work environment of micro and macro aggression directed towards me. These personal attacks not only affected me mentally, however, affected my job performance. This led to me awakening one morning and calling my new chairman and explaining, "I can't come to work today." He asked me what was wrong. "Are you sick or something?" I said, "I don't know. I just can't come to work today." He stated, take some time. Do you need 1 or 2 weeks off? I told him, I don't know. All I knew at that moment was I had to find myself, for I was totally lost. I decided to take a sabbatical. During this time, I sought counseling with a therapist 2 to 3 times a week, along with stress reduction and mindfulness training. Much of the therapy sessions initially focused on my upbringing and life experiences in my early childhood. We then followed up with the less than friendly daily work environment and inequities that I was essentially exposed to daily. The lack of equal utilization of resources such as overtime, physician's assistant, or just outright racial attacks against me. I struggled to fully understand the impact of such a hostile environment on me personally. To my surprise, after 4 weeks of heartfelt open discussions, the therapist stood and commented, "You have obviously been through a lot in your life and have persevered and have incredible resilience." He paused and stated, "I can't help you." He then reached out across the table, handed me a business card. This business card was a prominent discrimination attorney in Washington, D.C. For me, this was a moment of truth, potentially proceeding forward with a long drawn out discrimination lawsuit and potentially being ostracized professionally for years to follow, versus a renewed commitment in myself and overcoming these obstacles that were placed in front of me. With such a potential life-changing decision in front of me, I knew I had to look deep within my soul and take a moment of self-reflection to assess the path forward. With a deep love for orthopedics and not wanting to do anything else in life, I decided to fight with all my inner strength. And I did, with a renewed energy. I returned, doubling my RVUs, ramping up my research with substantial increases in number of publication, winning awards, both teaching and mentorship, both at the university and nationally. I had a voice and then took a new passion of diversity within the leadership. This was at a cost. The intense focus of self-isolation within my department created a sense of apathy. This was my survival skill to function on a daily basis within a dysfunctional and hostile work environment. Acknowledging this was not the healthiest approach. I then sought a life coach to better manage and create more balance in my life, both professionally and create an inner happiness. Interestingly, one Sunday morning while sitting back and reading the New York Times, I came across this article that caught my eye. As I read the article, I recognized the story was by my therapist, who was the author. It was a story printed in detail of my most challenging time in my life at the University of Virginia as a young faculty member, and pretty much referring to resilient personalities and avoidance of depression. Life does not go on in a vacuum. During this time, Charlottesville was going through changes from this historic election of the first Black president, Barack Obama, in 2008, to the unexpected election of Donald Trump in 2016. Lots of changes in a small college town of Charlottesville. A perfect storm was aligning. The center of attention was a small park with an old monument of Robert E. Lee. This fueled such differing viewpoints of to remove the statue or not, creating increased racial tensions in the spring of 2017. I had a true sense of fear and eventually violence would play out with the influx of outsiders coming into this town bearing Confederate flags and more in the spring of 2017. That Friday night, August 11th, I left the hospital to meet friends on a hotel rooftop for dinner overlooking the Jefferson statue and historic rotunda. As night fell from a distance across campus, hundreds of tiki torches marched towards these monuments. Moments later, to see the chaos that ensued with violent encounters between angry protesters and students surrounding the Jefferson statue. This impromptu protest was only the beginning of what would come that Saturday. Many persons close to me of all races and color planned to attend the protest and stand up to hate. For me personally, I struggled with my decision to attend, for I had a strong sense this was going to turn into something violent and not well. The hospital was put on disaster preparedness, which made the decision for me. Charlottesville that Saturday was ill-prepared for the violence that ensued, with hatred and bloodshed playing out on national TV. The memories of this horrific day are imprinted in my mind. A move to WashU, what I knew would be in my future of a great institution. This eventually came with patience and the right opportunity coming along at the right time. I then met Regis O'Keefe as my chairman, however, knowing him for many years when he was a tumor fellow under Dr. Mankin, and I was a fledgling PGY2. Regis O'Keefe is an incredible leader of national recognition, of a leader running an established orthopedic program, and a man understanding and having passion for diversity, as noted in his AOA induction speech in 2018, addressing the lack of diversity in orthopedics. He joked out loud, "Why should an old white man like me care about diversity?" His answer is clear, with not just words, but action. A man who sees the world as I see it at times, making me quite uncomfortable for his passion in diversity. Within the department, in such a short time, he has appointed me to leadership roles, both within the department and the School of Medicine. As the chair of the diversity committee for the department, I am working with my colleagues, residents, and fellows to increase the awareness and need for diversity. The Pied Piper phenomenon has flourished at Washington University with the doubling of Black and brown residents to the number of 5, 2 Latino residents, and 1 Native Indian. Not to be ignored, the number of women orthopedic surgeons and fellows and faculty members in the program. Washington University for many years has been perceived as the White Castle on the top of the mountain. In St. Louis, with the endorsement of Dr. O'Keefe, I have been instrumental in outreach initiatives to the community of St. Louis, both our department and institution of Washington University. Considering there is significant racial divide in the city of St. Louis, considering the Ferguson riots of 2014 and the COVID pandemic of 2020, which has disproportionately affected the Black population of St. Louis. This brings me full circle to my, this brings me full circle and back to my conversation with Sid. In my J.R. Gladden Society statement, post George Floyd, that was a small snippet of my life shared with my orthopedic colleagues. And now this presentation to you is my whole story, my journey of an academic Black surgeon. Again, it is not unique for many Black men in the world to have such a life experience. Lots of mixed feelings and emotions to tell my story. My true intentions of this presentation are to open the lines of communication for all people, to take a moment to have uncomfortable conversation on race relations, policies that continue to support systemic racism in academic institutions, worsening the healthcare disparities. Not to be afraid to use the word white privilege, unconscious bias, implicit bias, systemic racism in an open forum like this. My hope is my story will touch hearts and open eyes for each of us to reflect on our lives of how we can make a difference as we all ally to try to change and use our voices for change. A lack of a voice is an element of being complicit to the policies against people less like you. I am optimistic and see a change in all of us. For me, I have much hope and optimism, and optimistic change is imminent, not only for the world, but also for my son. I pray my son does not have to have these life experiences. In this current world of social unrest and feeling of helplessness, that is unlikely. I have to prepare my son for the difficult potential situations with frank dialogue and conversation to distinctly give him instructions when the police stops you. No rapid, quick movements, have your hands visible and placed on the dashboard, Place your license and registration on the dashboard, total politeness, and full answers to the police. I fear for my son, EJ, and now for my grandson, Paris. I would like to dedicate this talk to my mother, who is my ultimate strength and has guided me through this life and both in moments of joy and moments of strife. She is my true hero in all the meanings of the words, and I am thankful she has been such an integral part of my life. Thank you, Mom. Mother means. Mother is such a simple word, but to me, there's meaning seldom heard. For every day I am today, my mother showed me the way. I'll love my mother all the days for enriching my life in so many ways. She set me straight and then set me free, and that's what the word mother means to me. Thanks for being a wonderful mother, Mom. So in conclusion, I feel these bullet points are critical. Conversation has to start with a definite, with feelings of feeling uncomfortable. The journey for all of us is very real. Systemic racism and policies do exist within academic institutions and need to be addressed. Anti-racism must be a priority for all of us to make change. White privilege and the barriers that Black and brown people undergo are two ends of the spectrum. We all possess unconscious biases and implicit biases, which we all need to be self-reflective on. Silence without using a voice is complicit to these racial policies. And the importance of mentorship and sponsorship, particularly for those who are less than. We've talked a little bit earlier about the addition of the minority Black tax and acknowledging that. So in conclusion, I'd like to thank Dr. Vail, Dr. Burt, and Dr. Sig Bourbon and the entire UCSF orthopedic community for the special opportunity to share my thoughts, feelings, and perspectives in telling my story, the journey of an academic Black orthopedic surgeon. Thank you. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Carson. It's such an inspiring story, your journey, and I think it's definitely helpful to have the conversation. And would just like to open up the floor for any questions, comments, and just feel free to unmute yourself, turn on your video, and ask away.
Eric,
Maybe I'll start. Oh, go ahead, Tad, please.
All right, well, Sig, thank you for that. Eric, it just hearing an individual story is the most moving way to learn lessons, and I certainly learned the experience in life and how it interacts with your professional advancement. Your perspective is very clear and very real. So I thank you for that. That presentation, that very vivid look into your own experience and how it might affect our own behavior and our abilities to be allies in the struggles that you've outlined so clearly. So I don't have a question. It's just thank you and say, hey, your message is heard very clearly, very vividly, and very well done. So thank you.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I actually gave a similar talk for Gus White. Gus White had a symposium last weekend. I'm doing the same thing. I'm getting a little emotional. It's, I could sit down and write I could write an orthopedic presentation in an hour, and writing this actually took about 3 months. And it literally became, and I'll say Sig kind of stirred me on this. It became an epiphany. I woke up at 2 a.m. in the morning and Sig called me back and said, what are you going to talk about? I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I could give a straightforward didactic talk about anti-racism, systemic racism. And and as I started writing that presentation, it didn't touch me in any way. So I just literally woke up at 2 a.m. one morning and said, I just think I have a lot of life experiences that can talk about, racism, can talk about life, it can talk about diversity, just through my life experiences. And so that's kind of how this talk got born out. And I thank Sig for kind of helping me do this.
Eric, this is Cindy Chang.
Hey, Cindy.
How are you doing? Thank you so much for sharing your story, your life, everything. And one of the things I noted that you didn't point out was the article that was written by your treating counselor, therapist, where he wrote that things had come easy to you up to this point. I read that sentence and I went, what? You know, like that was, number one, crazy, but this is what I understand. And listening to your early part at 6:30, can you advise us in terms of how to handle microaggressions and macroaggressions that are coming from leaders, you know, people who are our superiors? Obviously you dealt with this at Virginia, but besides, you know, having a faith and confidence in your own abilities, what can we do? Where are the people that we can turn to try to turn that culture in our own, you know, medical center or department?
Right. So I'll answer the first part of your question. The first part of your question was his comment. So it was a little confrontational when I got back to him because I didn't sign a disclosure you could write about me in the New York Times Magazine. So that's a whole nother long story. But in my discussion with him, I said, you know, did you really think things came easy to me? And he says, well, you know, you're obviously very gifted and things kept happening to you. So he kind of made this, put two and two together that things were easy. And it was never easy, but that he put two and two in his perspective in my resilience. To comment on your second point, microaggression is, you know, it's kind of the buzzword now. And I always kind of throw it back. And it's interesting because most of the people ask me this question to women. And I'm like, if anyone knows what microaggression is, you do. And you experience it on a regular basis within the field of orthopedics. So it's very real. And as I said earlier, I think one of the things that I'm trying to do with the ACGME, for at least for residents, is we're trying to create a safe place. So like, for instance, it was your institution where they actually did the study, and I'm not sure if you're all familiar with it, but they were looking at microaggression events that were happening in the hospital. And what they did was they put up a little QRS code, it was one of your hospitals out in California, but they put up QRS codes, and anytime a resident felt as though there was a microaggression event or something that was adverse that was to them, they then put their phone up there anonymously and just documented that there was an event. And surprisingly, they were able to then break it down across the hospital after about 3 months. Well, unfortunately, the most common place of where microaggression was happening was in the ER. And then they felt as though the ER needed some education. So it was a time to learn. But my biggest point is, I think, creating safe places. We can be safe places for our residents. I mean, my residents confide a lot in me now, whereas they felt as though they didn't have anyone to talk to. And they confide in me not just because I'm Black, but I have open ears and I have open eyes to things going on in the world. So I'm not saying that a Black person has to be that safe place for another Black person, or women has to be for another one. It's just any one of us can be a safe place. And I think that's really where microaggression needs to be addressed. And where I'm struggling the hardest with microaggression is, how do you make microaggression to the person who's actually done it a teaching point? And that's the hard part, because there's always that sensitivity, well, I didn't mean that. Well, that's not how I interpreted it. And your implicit biases or unconscious biases brought this forth. So it's a catch-22 of how to best address this. And I don't have the easiest way. And that's one of my things I'm working really hard on, particularly the ACGME.
I think Dr. Bervin, did you have a question also?
Yeah, thanks. Eric, thank you. Thank you for making the story personal and so powerful. And I really appreciate how much you shared. And it's terrific to hear more about your journey since we had time together. What I want to ask is, when Melissa and Tad and our leadership here began our DEI initiative, and quite honestly, I didn't think I had a whole lot to share. And since then, I'm really, Melissa and Rosie and others have shown me that there is a lot to share. And one of the things that actually Melissa brought up with me is the notion of anti-racism, and Ibram Kendi's book, which I had a chance to look at, anti-racism alliance. What are some of the best examples that you might be able to identify in your experience of people who have really effectively created alliances, really done anti-racist things, and what can, how can that we learn from that?
So I think, you know, ultimately it comes from top down. You know, really the leadership is going to really put forth these thoughts and these feelings that have to permeate throughout the entire department. Without it coming from the top, it's going to fall on deaf ears. And if leadership is going to walk the walk and talk the talk, people tend to start listening. I mean, yes, you got to do a whole bunch of modules on diversity. You got to do a whole bunch of modules on equity, you know, and, you know, people get tired of doing all these modules, and modules aren't really the best way to learn. I think sharing life stories like this are a great way of just showing examples of how change can happen, and just some of the experiences that people have that you may not be quite aware of. And so I think it's really understanding your colleagues and their experiences, what they go through, which will then allow everybody to kind of come a little bit closer together.
And I see hand up from Anthony Wiggins. Anthony, you want to unmute?
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Hey,
Hey,
Dr.
Anthony,
Carson,
good to see you again.
yeah, it's great to see you again. Thanks so much for sharing your story with the UCSF community here. It's truly inspiring, and certainly resonates quite a bit with me. And I don't know if everyone knows this, but you've certainly impacted my career and kind of my journey into orthopedics, and will continue to do so. And I just want to emphasize how helpful and important it is to continue to hear folks like yourself share these stories, because it helps ward off those feelings of isolation and the imposter syndrome and feeling like you're going through this alone. So I just wanted to thank you so much for taking
you again. It's been great communicating with you. Yeah, I didn't use the word imposter syndrome today. Explain to people what imposter syndrome is, Anthony. I'm tired of talking. You talk now.
Yeah. So, I mean, you touched briefly on it, but it's kind of this feeling. You look around, you wonder if you really deserve to be here, or, you know, do you have the credentials? Are you deserving? And, you know, are you at the same level as those around you, basically? And a lot of it comes, as you alluded to, from the society, and kind of from these ideas that perhaps we're not, and some of these suggestions that we are only where we are because of the color of our skin, and not because of our merit. And so, you know, those thoughts can certainly start to creep in and affect the way that you operate and kind of flow through the day. And I think, again, just staying close to family, having mentors like yourself to reassure you that, you know, you deserve to be where you are, and just keep working hard, and continue to deserve those things that come. So
that's a great description. That was a fantastic description. And the one thing that we're writing about the ACGME is we are talking about the imposter syndrome, but we're actually created this new term, which if you steal it, I know where it came from. It's called the death spiral. And what the death spiral is, it involves not just the imposter syndrome, but you get to a point where you start questioning yourself. You not only get questioned by yourself, you then get questioned by your attendings. You then start having these outright, you know, feelings of depression, unhappiness that then affect your job performance, which then gets you called into your PD's office, which then you're on probation. And like I said, I'm kind of sort of the Olivia Pope of scandal for underrepresented minorities around the country. And I have so many stories of where this has actually happened. And pretty much what it comes down to, in the majority of times that these residents are struggling, it's typically when they feel this sense of shame, they feel this sense of doubt, and they're embarrassed, and they won't reach out for help. And so that's really where a lot of this comes into play, of having a safe place so that we can identify when these things are happening. So, you know, I'm not just referring to Black and brown people. I'm also referring to women. There are some programs out there that are a little bit hostile towards women, and they fall into that same category of not having someone to talk with, start doubting themselves. And so it happens. It happens, and we're now calling it the death spiral.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say, again, echo the thanks. And we were just, a couple of us were just in a training offered by one of our, some of our diversity leaders here at UCSF. And they were talking about the difference of being a bystander and an upstander, and how hard it is to be an upstander, right? The person who calls out that person committing the microaggression. And actually part of the training was exercising how to do that so it's more comfortable. And I think of you as the ultimate upstander, right? You definitely have not stood by and just let life happen to you, right? You've actually changed and made a difference for so many. And I think it's inspiring that we can all be upstanders in our own way and try to do, you know, at least in small part what you've been doing. So again, I want to thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. So we, our intern class, last year we had two African Americans, and they literally were here in St. Louis for a total of 3 days. They just moved in. They were just kind of going through orientation. The St. Louis Blues had just won the Stanley Cup. And they decided, well, you know, St. Louis, this is great. One is from the South in Atlanta, and the other one is from Washington, D.C. And they said, well, let's go down and see the celebration. So they went down. There was 1 million+ people for the St. Louis Blues, and they were just kind of standing on a corner, and they were watching the parade go by. And this woman walks up to him and says, "You need to move." And they're looking, going, "Why do we need to move?" They're like, "Well, you know, we have our tent set up here, and you need to move." And they're like, "Okay, well, you know, we'll take a couple steps this way," realizing there's millions of people. So at this point in time, the woman then looks at them and says, "No, I told you you need to move. You need to go back to your neighborhood, okay?" So at this point, the woman says, "Well, I'm gonna go get my father." So it comes back. Now, literally, I've known both of these residents. I mentored them through medical school. So I knew both of them really well. They then opened their phone up, they called me and said, "Dr. Carson, I think something bad's about ready to happen." And at this point, this guy walks up on and says, "Well, you know, my daughter says you're threatening them." And she's like, they're like, "We're just standing here." Short version of the story is they pushed one of the residents, and literally, you know, at this point in time, the comment that they made was very clear, was, "I don't understand why you're coming at me. I'm an orthopedic surgery resident at WashU." As soon as they said that, as people had backed up, thousands of people had backed up, people stepped in the middle at that point in time, recognizing they weren't from the other side of St. Louis, of North St. Louis. So when you talk about people stepping in, I think it's obviously a very uncomfortable thing of whether you're stepping in the middle of a micro or a macro aggression. It doesn't make a difference. It's a very difficult task of walking into a situation like that. So of course they called me up, and we talked on the phone after that, and I'm like, "Please don't leave. We'll work this out." And they're fine. So what they actually do, which is even more ridiculous, is they walk around. Anytime they go out in St. Louis, they always have WashU orthopedic garb on to identify themselves as WashU residents. It's the real world.
Dr. Carson, my name is Ian McNeil. I'm a clinical spine fellow here in the Department of Orthopedics. I actually trained in neurosurgery, but been fortunate to train with the orthopedic team here for my fellowship. And we were actually, I was actually at UVA for medical school, and unfortunately I didn't get to meet you there, but I think that kind of speaks to how people can kind of operate in silos and not know of the existing community. But just wanted to thank you for speaking boldly about your experience, and specifically talking about the toll of isolation and in terms of mental health. I think that's something that as surgeons and subspecialists, we are learned to just kind of grin and bear it, never complain, keep your heads down and kind of push through. But in the midst of isolation, that can definitely be a burden, and you feel like you never have someone to reach out to. So thank you for speaking about that. And also wanted to thank Dr. Vale and Dr. Bourbon for allowing this type of forum, because as a fellow who's transitioning and attending next year, this type of opportunity to hear this is going to serve for a source of inspiration and strength going forward for me. So I think allowing this forum to exist and to continue doing these things, I can't really describe how meaningful it is, and to do it in a wide form for the entire department really establishes a platform for how important these conversations are. So thank you. I don't have a question, just wanted to share my thank you publicly.
Thanks, Ian, I appreciate it. And thanks, Sid, and thank you, Dr. Vail. This was a tremendous opportunity. Like I said, I get a little emotional every time I have to give this talk. This is the second time this is the second time in 2 weeks I've had to give it. So it's still, each time I give it, it's pretty emotional.
Well, you should know that there probably aren't too many people out here listening who didn't feel some emotion as well. So it's highly successful.
Thank you.
Thank
I know
you.
everybody got to work.
And I think, just Dr. Carson, thanks again so much. I think, you've heard across the board, everybody enjoyed this so much. So we really appreciate you taking the time to join us this morning. And look forward to hopefully seeing you in person at some point and continuing to interact with you going forward.
I want to say one last thing. So the finance world is very different from the medicine world. This is a new thought process that's going out there now. We as orthopedists do a lot of mentoring, but when we get into a position of power, as Ian has said, and SIG and working with SIG, it then becomes what's called sponsorship. So you step beyond mentorship to sponsorship and allowing a person who you feel is deserving of fighting for them to sit at the table. So sponsorship, I think, is my next big initiative in regards to looking at diversity, is that we as leaders have to step up and be willing to step outside our comfort level and sponsor people that may not be sponsored by anybody else. That's my last concept.
Very good.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Dr. Carson.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really
Thank you, everybody.
thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's fantastic. I appreciate it.
Everyone.
Bye, Eric. Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Bye, Colleen. Bye, Ken. Bye, Sig.
Eric, I want you to share your poem about moms, if you can.
Share my what?
Your poem, your last poem about mother.
Oh yeah, I'll definitely share that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. I love it. I love it. Yeah. The thing I'll tell you more about it later.
Okay. All right. Bye. Thank you for taking the
Eric,
time.
I'll reach out to you and try and get a copy of that whole talk. That was terrific. Some great quotes, and thanks for sharing that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sig. Hey, Sig, you inspired this talk. Just so you know it, you inspired it.
You inspire me. I'll see you soon.
Okay, take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.